make a 3D butterfly with me and my little glass helpers. Today I'm using this 2 butterflies pattern that you can find through the description links. I was given a sheet of this iridised crinkle glass which I've always wanted to make into wings, so I'm going to build the colour scheme around it. Over in my scrap boxes, I'm choosing out some colours. I'm going to choose out a few different colours, put them aside and see how they work together. I went for some blues and greens for this piece, but I'm also choosing out some purples and pinks that I'm going to use for the other butterfly later. And once I'm happy, I'll take them over to my bench and lay them out on my pattern just to make sure I've got enough of each kind. When I print a pattern, I print 2 or 3. I do one to laminate so that I can place wet pieces on it, and one to keep my pieces in order, and another one to cut up if I'm using opaque glass. I mostly use transparent glass in tutorials because it's quicker and it's easier to show on camera. I start by scoring each piece along the pattern lines, applying even pressure. All the cuts are done freehand for this pattern due to the curves. Sometimes I'll do all the scores and then all the breaks, and sometimes I do score, break, just depends on the piece. After scoring, I use my running pliers to break the pieces, and occasionally grozers when I get a bit nervous that the run isn't going to go smoothly. If I can't see a score, I put the piece back onto my pattern and try and break it where the score should be, and that usually works unless I've forgotten to score altogether. Just going to zip around all of these pieces now and get that pattern cut. This piece of light green glass has a heavy texture on it, and you can see that the edge just came off with a slant. That's something I need to clean up with the grinder because it's really going to change how the pieces fit together in the end. I thought this piece of crinkle glass would be brittle because it was so old, but it actually cut like a dream. Whenever I've got 2 pieces that are connecting to each other, I try and keep it in one to start with and then do the connecting line. That way you know those 2 pieces are just going to sit really flush together because they've come from the same piece. So for this one I did one long line for both of the wings and then cut off all the edges to make the shapes. With the darker piece, I've chosen to cut up the paint pattern and trace around it with a paint pen. I'm using a paint pen because they're easy to wash off in soapy water. So this is why I'd ordinarily have that 3rd sheet of paper that I forgot to print this time. One to cut and then one to remain under my already cut pieces. But in this case I'm just going to use the same one because these are my last pieces, I won't need it again anyway. Since I traced around the shape, I'm cutting to the inside of the white line just to make up for the pen width. Some people use sticker sheets to attach their pattern to the top, which is another good idea. I don't bother because it just seems a little wasteful to me, and this works just as well, but it can be a time saver if you're doing a large pattern because you can grind right up to the sticker sheet. In this case, I can just grind up to the white line anyway. Now that all the pieces are cut, I put it together in a manner that is hopefully an upcoming Instagram post, and I move on to the grinding. I fill the grinder up to the water level indicated and just make sure it doesn't go over. This can be pretty important because there are some grinders that if the water goes too high, it can end up in the motor and ruin the machine. And when you turn it on, just check that the water is coming up and wetting the head. On with the safety glasses. Here's a quick montage of all the pieces. You may notice that some of them have white pen. I've just marked on the glass where it overlaps with its neighbour, and I'll grind enough so that the pen is removed. It gives me really sharp lines when they come together at the end. When I'm doing quite a bit of grinding on one area, I do some long sweeps through the whole glass and just concentrate a little bit more on the end, and I find that makes the edge a lot smoother. After grinding, it's bath time. This removes all the grinder dust so that the foil can stick. I did the bath in 2 batches so that I could easily identify the pieces and get them back into their correct positions on the pattern. You could also put the numbers on with pen or just do one piece at a time, and that would have the same effect. So here's the finished cut. There are a couple of small gaps that will easily be hidden with solder. I never try and make my pieces fit perfectly together. I just don't care enough for that. My finished piece will be patinaed black, so I'm choosing a black foil in 5.5mm. The brand that I've got is on the cheaper side, but the only real difference I found is that the glue isn't quite as sticky. So make sure to pinch the start to the glass really well and keep my finger on it for as long as possible. Then I wrap each piece and pinch all sides around with my fingers. For the deep curve, I run my finger over the flat foil just to heat it up a little bit, and that allows the foil to mould to the glass without tearing. I use my nails to push the foil in at the corners and make a really sharp edge, almost like one of those nurses' hospital corners. And that way the second piece of foil folds down really flat, and when I use the lathe-gun to smooth it, it's like it's not even there. So I use my lathe-gun to smooth out the foil on the edges and on each side. When I'm finished foiling the whole project, I like to measure out how much copper was used by just measuring the leftover backing. For me, this gives a really good indication of the size of the project, including the intricacy, and therefore how much I could charge for it. This piece used just under 2 meters of the foil. Again, this shot is just for the gram. Unfortunately, my phone ran out of disk space here and didn't tell me that it stopped filming, so you just have to imagine me pinning each wing to my corkboard. Holds together really well while I tin one side of the piece, just to keep everything together. Then I can unpin it and turn them off and create the nice bead on the other side, turn it back over again and finish the bead on the first side. I'm using the word tinning a lot, and that means just wiping the solder over just to cover, not creating the bead on it yet. Some people tin every piece before they put it together. I find that's really good for 3D work, but I don't bother for flat pieces. To get a really nice bead on the side, it's important to keep the soldering horizontal so that it can pull and cool. To do this, I prop up the piece with my running pliers. I find the rubber tips hold it steady and I can turn the pieces as it dries. Another way to keep the edge seam consistent with the rest of the piece is to use a thicker solder on those sides. It's a really great way to do it, and I'll probably do a video where I use that technique just so you can see the difference. To put my butterfly in the flight position, I'm using my Little Glass Helpers angle kit. I'm testing a few different angles here. I'm starting with the heptagon. I found this a bit too flat, not flighty enough. Next, I'm doing the square. I thought this was a bit too angled for what I wanted, and finally I settled on the pentagon, 108 degrees. The steel rod keeps the join of the pieces on the inside of the piece, which will give me space on the other side to attach the antenna. Once I'm happy with the position, I flux and solder. Because the angle kit has lots of slots for the angle cards, it's really easy to get a good position to hold your glass. Doesn't matter if you've only got a little bit of a join or a long join, you can move those slots along to what suits you best. Here I'm putting them quite close together because there's really not a lot of glass that's attaching to each other, especially compared to the size of the overall project. For the antenna, I have 2 scraps of copper, which I've cut to equal size, and then I use my needle nose pliers to shape them into a somewhat correct curve. But the shape's going to change quite a bit while I'm, messing with my butterfly, so I'm not too concerned about the curve. The most important thing is at the ends, I'm using the needle nose pliers just to create a small circle at the end of each, and it's just enough to hold a blob of solder on it, which gives it a really pretty shape. I tin the antenna on my bench before holding them with pliers and attaching them to the underside of the butterfly with the solder. I like to use the soldering iron just to melt the solder where it's going to go before I press it down lightly and then put more solder on top of it. Gives it a really strong join. Now I use my angle kit just to hold the butterfly steady while I attach a jump ring for hanging. My jump ring holder holds some pre-made jump rings, and I select one lucky contestant, which I tin before attaching it to the butt of my butterfly. Unfortunately, when I tried to hang it from this jump ring, it dangled upside down like I forgot how gravity even works. So eventually I just removed the ring and I attached a copper rod to the bottom of the butterfly to turn it into a garden stake. Naturally, there's no video of that, you just have to imagine it. So then I wash all the flux off. This is really important. If you want your patina to work, it's just so important to get the flux off. I use an old scourer. It's not fresh enough that it creates scratches all over my solder, but it's still enough to get into all the nooks and crannies and really scrub off the flux. Now is a great time to don some more safety gear and crack open the patina. There's lots of different ways to apply patina. I generally use a toothbrush. It gets into all the joints, which can be difficult to reach with just your hand. But using a gloved hand or a bit of rag or something will work pretty well as well. And just marvel at that transformation. Now that the glass has metamorphosized into a butterfly, it's ready to fly away and reject me. So I release my new friend into the wild and take some pretty pictures of it. Let me know if you use the pattern in the comments. Little glass helpers are available at Perth Art Glass and they deliver worldwide. Thanks for watching.